Howdy, this is Pastor Eric from Big Sandy Church of God in Big Sandy, Montana. It's been a couple weeks. I apologize. I am struggling with my schedule to get these videos out consistently. And I'm going to do my best to be a little more consistent and punctual in doing them. I'm also flirting with the idea of doing a couple other little video projects. So keep an eye out. We'll see what happens. But in the immediate, what we're going to do today is we're going to transition from what we were talking about over the last few weeks, which is about the Bible as evidence. We started out talking about what the Bible is. Then we moved on and we talked about translations and whether or not it has been accurately translated or diluted through translation. We have talked about whether or not the Bible has been changed over time and rewritten or diluted through copying errors or whatever. Like we've sort of dissected and discussed these topics. And so then from there, we talked about the Bible as eyewitness testimonies. It is not a single book. It is a collection of testimonies about historic events. And so we talked about that last time. It was a two-parter. And then this week, what we're going to talk about is that, like, if it's true that the information written down by the disciples in the first place has come to us accurately, like it is through the centuries become like handed down, and what we have is basically what they said, then the question arises, what do we do with that? Because if the words are accurate to what they said, then we have to deal with that because there's some pretty huge claims being made. And so then it becomes a question of, like, is it true? Because, like, these guys passed it on, and they what we have is what they had or what they put down. And so then, is it true? Is what the disciples put on paper true? And I will let you know, like, what we're talking about this week specifically is, did they lie? Did the disciples lie in the testimony that they offered regarding what they saw and experienced? And that's a big question, right? Like it is not a small thing. Like, is it all a lie? And we're going to focus on the New Testament. It's where we're going to stay. I rather enjoy talking about the New Testament. And before we dive into the, like, did they lie question, just in relation to the disciples, what we're going to discuss here is, first off, like, why do people tell lies? I used to do this, talk about this material in at the home that I worked at. Like, it was a mental health facility, and I would do this with drug addicts and gang members and sex offenders, and we'd start talking about lying. Everybody had all kinds of thoughts on the topic. And I'm going to offer a suggestion that there are basically 5 reasons that people tell lies. Okay? 5 reasons that all lies happen. And now watch this. First off, they lie. People lie to stay out of trouble or to get out of trouble. Right? I mean, I didn't steal that. I didn't kill that guy. I didn't, whatever. People lie to avoid problems, to avoid guilt, to avoid, responsibility. That is a good reason people lie. People lie to gain something because they want to get something out of a situation, either pride, notoriety, money, power, whatever. Like, people lie to get something. I'm sure most of us have done this, like, told a lie because they want influence or because they want something out of a situation. Pride. Sometimes people exaggerate, right? Or they invent things completely. That's like a fish story. I caught a fish this big, but, like, you didn't catch a fish at all, or the fish was this big, or whatever. I mean, there's a reason people lie, because they want to puff themselves up or present themselves as more awesome than they actually are. Some people lie because they're evil, right? Like, they want revenge, or they want to create chaos, or because they like to hurt people or whatever. I mean, that is a reason people lie. They have evil intent in their hearts. And finally, people lie out of altruism sometimes. Sometimes they lie because they think it's the right thing to do. They lie because they want, other people to feel good, or because they want other people to behave a certain way. That's not that unusual. It does happen. And so let's kind of work our way through the lies, quote unquote, like whether or not these are lies. If what the disciples said was lies across the board. And actually, we're going to start with where they told their story. And that's a big deal because one of the things, if the story of Jesus is a lie, right? If the story of Jesus is a lie, it was a lie that survived the time and place and managed to grow explosively. And so, the problem with that is that the church started in Jerusalem and then the surrounding countryside. The very earliest beginnings of the church happened right there in Bethlehem and Jerusalem and all these other places. Like, the early church was there. Why does that matter? Why is that a big deal? Well, it matters because if the stories and accounts of Jesus are lies, if they're invented out of whole cloth, then the people that they were telling them to would know, because they would have met the same person or not met him, and they would have seen his actions or not seen them. So if this Jesus person walked into Jerusalem and healed people, if he made the blind see, if he taught publicly, if he did all of these things, so Jesus is this guy who shows up and does this stuff, or just 3 miles or 4 miles outside of Jerusalem brings a man back from the dead, or walks on water, which I guess only the disciples saw, so you could argue that, but multiplied food in front of 5,000 people. These accounts, which spread throughout the region as a part of the early church's existence. And we know that because the Gospels have support for having been there. The Gospel of John was found, a fragment of the Gospel of John was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls and whatnot. We have support for the idea that the Gospels were in that area. You couldn't convince people that they saw something they didn't see. You can't convince people that they went and saw Jesus in the desert and there was 5,000 of us and he fed us all with, a couple of loaves of bread and a fish. That miracle, people believed it because they were there. People believed in the healings because they were there. People believed Jesus was a guy who was actually there teaching because they saw him. Otherwise, the church would have to go somewhere else, like Greece or North Africa, as a starting point, because everybody would say, dude, that just didn't happen. Dude, there was no guy named Jesus. Dude, he didn't heal people. Yeah, nope, that guy, he's still blind. See, look, he's still blind. The reality is that as a lie, to start telling it in a place where it would be obviously discredited is crazy. It's just crazy. It would not work. It would not have grown into thousands upon thousands of people in the first couple of decades. It would not have spread into the surrounding countryside. It would not have become a common thing in the world because it would have been easily disproven. And to take it a step further, right now, watch this. Paul wrote in Corinthians that if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, then the faith that we have is in vain. The one way to disprove Christianity is to prove that Jesus never rose from the dead. And so if we start that point, start at that point, that Jesus rising from the dead is the center of the faith, then if the disciples were preaching in Jerusalem, then all the religious leaders would have had to have done is produce the body. All they would have had to have done is brought out the corpse of Jesus and say, look, he's still dead. But they didn't. And in fact, actually, there is no claims like in the references to Jesus in the Talmud. They call him a sorcerer. There are no claims that there were lies about whether or not he performed miracles. There are claims that he was crucified. There are no claims regarding like, hey, we went and checked and his body was still there. Like there are no claims to that. Like it is never addressed. Though it would have been the easiest thing in the world to kill the church with that. And so that's a big deal. That is not a small thing. So despite the fact that it started where the events took place, the story took root. If it was made up, it wouldn't have. So now let's look at what the disciples got out of it, right? So like, did the disciples get rich? Did they become famous? Well, in the long run, I guess they did. During their lifetimes, maybe not so much. Did it make them look awesome? Like, did they do it because they were evil? So let's look at this. First off, let's look at what happened to the disciples. The Apostle John, right, died in prison, a very old man. To avoid prison, actually, all he would have had to have done was denounce Jesus. That's it. But he didn't. So right out of the gate, we know like that sort of defies that to stay out of trouble idea, right? Peter was crucified, swearing that he saw Jesus raised from the dead. Disciples were stoned to death. They were beaten with whips until they died. They were run through with swords and spears and everything else. And so like it didn't keep them out of trouble. Like there's no argument in the world that works that way. All of them except John died of natural causes. And in fact, actually, a lot of the early church leaders beyond the disciples were killed for teaching about Jesus. Well, if I made something up, if I told this lie, if I invented a story, doing it to stay out of trouble wouldn't make sense because it got him in more trouble. It got him killed. In a lot of instances, they lived on the run or on the move. They were homeless. They were poor. They did not have a great deal of personal wealth. And so the idea that they lied to gain anything like financial doesn't make sense. They lost their homes. They lost their community. Some of them were ostracized by their families. They didn't gain anything monetarily. Well, what about, fame? Like people looked up to them and they gained influence. Again, not really. In the early years of Christianity, although it did grow, they were persecuted and they were pushed out and they were attacked and they were like marginalized. They didn't get a lot of positive press. This didn't make them famous or popular. It made them decidedly unpopular. And in fact, James, who was Jesus's half-brother, who was the leader of the church after Peter fled and went into exile, James was actually just murdered publicly when Roman power shuffled. And it was like an opportunity. They just murdered him. Like, did he get something out of it? Nope. Did it keep him out of trouble? Nope. Nothing good came out of this for them. Pride. Maybe it was a big fish story. Here again, I have never, ever seen a guy tell a fish story he was willing to die for. I have never heard somebody exaggerate something or say something that to make them look awesome that they were willing to be tortured to say it was true. And to take it a step further, the disciples all traveled all over the world. Some of them went as far as India. They were in North Africa. They were in Ethiopia. They were in Europe. They were all over the place traveling, preaching about Jesus. A fish story is not a reason to go to a foreign land where nobody knows you and nobody cares about you to tell it. I don't know people who go, I'm going to Europe to tell my fish story to strangers. Doesn't make that much sense. But don't worry, I'm going to be homeless while I do it, so it'll be a good deal, and somebody will probably murder me for doing it. If that's the case, it's not a very smart lie. So let's talk about evil intent, right? Like, what is the evil intent here? Like, oh, well, what if they just made it up to get revenge on the society that oppressed them? Or like as a way of rebelling against Rome? Well, it's kind of a weird thing to be antisocial, to be this kind of evil person, but to advocate for taking care of poor people or widows, making sure widows are cared for, that you tell the truth all the time, or that you don't cheat on your wife, or that you treat your wife with love and respect. that would be a weird kind of evil teaching collection. It just doesn't make that much sense. Like at the end of the day, the teachings of Christianity cause people to make the lives around them better. And it's part of the reason Christianity grew is because they were moral and ethical and good. And, and people wanted that. They took care of sick people. They took care of, poor people. They took care of folks when they didn't have to. It's a weird thing to teach people to do that kind of stuff because you're evil. It doesn't make sense. And finally, what if they did it because they were trying to make people behave better? It's a possibility, right? Like, what if it was just a made-up story to make people behave? Well, as card-carrying Jews, right? Like, what they were doing was ethically reprehensible and evil. And actually so, if they were just making it up, it was so evil, it was a death penalty offense in the Jewish religion. It was a blasphemy of the highest sort. And mind you, this is a culture, again, where blasphemy, they executed people for it. You didn't say God's name in case you accidentally said it in a way that was inappropriate and blasphemed God. Like it was a huge deal. They would be committing the most offensive cultural acts to get people to behave themselves. Yeah, I don't know. To get people to make their lives better by being ostracized, by being mistreated by their neighbors. There's a big argument that part of the reason that some Christians tried to become more Jewish was so that they could receive charity through the synagogues, and because there was a system of care in the synagogues, and like there's an argument that part of Paul's teachings about that stuff was hey guys, don't do that. Take care of each other. Why would you make people's lives worse to try and make them behave better? And even more so, why would you tell them a lie to help them behave better? It would be contrary. Why would you do the most offensive cultural stuff you could possibly do to get people to behave better? And how would you get a dozen other guys to, not just a dozen, lots of other guys to do the same thing to the point of being tortured to death? It doesn't make sense. And so my argument is that when you look at the facts about what the disciples did, how they did it, where they did it, the idea that they were lying really doesn't hold water. It doesn't make sense. If you have arguments you want to engage with this, if you have objections, if you have thoughts, if you have questions, this is a really simple treatment of this topic. Email me, ask me, call me, put it in the comments. I love to talk about this stuff. Like I said, I think I said this, I've got a couple of things I might start doing video-wise. We'll see. Let me know if there's stuff you want me to do or you're interested in, and I'm going to try and get these out a little more often. Once again, I'm Eric from Big Sandy. God bless you. Have a good day.